Hey there, my name is Jonathan Friedman, and you are listening to the FAQs podcast by EHN Canada. This is the show where we scour the internet for the most frequently asked questions about mental health and addiction and ask an expert for their answers to them. Today, it is my honor and my pleasure to introduce to you my special guest, Kim Addis. Kim is the founder of Frame of Mind Coaching, recognized as a pioneer in the field of leadership coaching and thought mastery. Kim uses her unique philosophy and quirky coaching style to help leaders identify their blind spots and learn to direct their thinking to achieve extraordinary results. Author, speaker, entrepreneur, coach, and mom of five, Kim's claim to fame is teaching her powerful coaching process to leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs worldwide. Kim has been featured speaker for organizations including Microsoft, Tech, Visage, PMI, WIT, SHRM, and much, much more. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
It's going to be a great, great time. We're excited to have you.
Amazing.
Before we get into the nitty gritty, before we get into the 5 questions that we're going to be asking you today, I would love to hear how you got into coaching and into leadership. Give us the rundown.
Okay, well, I've always been a studier, you could say, of leadership ever since I was in school. Did my undergraduate degree in psychology with a specialty in leadership, and then did a master's degree where I was always interested in leadership, organizational behavior, that kind of thing. And it took me through the years, that fascination. But before I ran Frame of Mind Coaching, which I've been doing for 20 years, it's been a long time. I owned another company. I owned a software company. And in that software company, we used to build simulation-based assessments. And the purpose of those assessments was to help companies make better hiring decisions. And we were interested in leadership. We were interested in top performers. We were interested in really discovering if we're going to hire a person, who would be more likely to succeed in comparison to everyone else. And we learned important things in that process. But I ran that company for 10 years. And after I sold it, I ended up getting recruited very shortly thereafter by a coaching company here in Toronto. And I worked there for about close to 9 months, not quite, but close to 9 months. And I got a chance to observe how they coach and what their process was. And as I observed that, I felt like they were doing something fundamentally wrong. And I felt like I could do a better job. I felt like they were missing some very, very key elements in coaching. And that's when I decided to try it out on my own. And I started Frame My Coaching. And again, 20 years ago.
Well, what a journey.
What a journey.
So, Kim, as I mentioned before, I know I kind of cheated by asking you a first question ahead of the 5 questions. But today we're going to go into the internet's 5 biggest questions around navigating mental health and leadership and stress and all of these topics. And are you ready for the first question?
I'm ready.
So the first question that is most searched on the internet for mental health and leadership: what challenges do leaders typically struggle with when it comes to their mental health?
So I see 4 struggles over and over and over again that leaders encounter in various areas of their lives. But I have been able to categorize them into 4 specific, tangible, or understandable components. So
Mm-hmm.
the first thing that I see is many leaders struggle with isolation. And what does that mean? It means they don't talk to anybody, they don't trust anybody. They carry a big burden of responsibility on their shoulders, and they carry it alone. And while they have people to delegate to, they don't really expose themselves, and they don't really feel super comfortable getting vulnerable. So to a great extent, they carry the burden on their shoulders by themselves. And so that's definitely a very, very common theme among leaders, is that they may be surrounded by people, and they are, but they also feel a very big sense of isolation. And it's not something that's easily seen by the eye, but it's something they feel on the inside.
So can you describe for me, like, isolation could be something physical where somebody is inside their home all the time, something like along those lines, but also there's a feeling of isolated. You could be the loudest person in a room surrounded with the coolest people and still feel it.
that's more along the lines of what we see with leaders is they're often surrounded. In fact, they often don't get a few minutes to themselves. They're always busy, their agendas are full, but whatever it is that they're feeling, thinking, what they're stressed about, worried about, what goes on internally is not something that is necessarily shared. So even with their spouse, even with, their closest employees or their second in command, they're not sharing everything. And so what that means is they hold a lot in, and that builds up into stress, sometimes exhaustion, toxicity, burnout, all of that kind of thing. But that feeling of I got to keep it to myself builds over time, and it leads to all kinds of even physical illnesses that we see.
So in the world of leaders, I think you scroll through LinkedIn and almost every third post is about burnout. It's something that comes up a lot of time. And what you're suggesting is one of the patterns you see when you're working with all of these leaders in a coaching capacity is that isolation is a function like of the burnout. It's the cause or one of the four causes.
Isolation is definitely a feeling of being trapped where they have no
Mm.
choice, and they don't have anywhere to deposit or unload or share whatever it is that they're carrying. And so that heaviness becomes exhausting and becomes something that definitely leads to burnout, I would say. Yes.
And is that just at work?
No, not at work, because then at home, in a way, they're viewed as leaders too, and perhaps they're not as effective at home, and perhaps there are all these things that they need to manage that are simply out of their control. Kids are a good example, and so very often what happens is they come home, and home is supposed to be your safe haven, but very often it's not. It becomes another workload, another source of stress. And while some of them may or may not have partners, um, each one comes home with their own load of stress, and it becomes hard to put it down. It's just another thing to carry.
Or thing to carry? It's really, really interesting. And I guess too, like a lot of people come to coaching because they think it's this professional thing. How do I improve my performance? How do I improve this? But Jonathan over here is Jonathan at home. He's Jonathan at work. He's Jonathan everywhere. What happens at home affects me at work. What happens at work affects me at home. I think I said the same thing twice, but vice versa.
You
You
got
get
it.
what I mean? Perfect. Crushed it. But yeah. So you said there were four struggles.
Yeah, but just to before we go to the
Sorry.
next
Too
struggle,
excited.
you're 100% right. Is you take yourself everywhere you go, and
Mhm.
so the stress you carry in one place will accompany you to the next. And so when we coach individuals, we don't separate the person from the professional. We look at the whole being and how they show up, interact, behave, feel in all of their environments. And that's very, very important. And when we do that, what we see is performance also increases, as well as peacefulness and greater sense of ease and all these other things. But we're looking at both sides of the equation. Okay, so
Love that.
struggle number two.
Hmm.
The second thing we see is that these are individuals who have this interesting friction that they experience with other humans. And so, what do we see? We see that leaders tend to think faster, they tend to have vision, they tend to have a greater sense of urgency, they tend to often work harder, longer. And when they look around themselves, they feel like other people don't get it quite the same way. They don't have the same sense of urgency. They aren't working as intelligently, as efficiently, as professionally, whatever. There's other people don't match their standards of performance personally and professionally. And so what we see is that leaders often have friction with others, and there are two kinds of friction we see. One is overt friction, where a leader might voice their frustration, their anger, their disappointment. But the more common friction we see is a covert friction or a silent friction, where the leader sees somebody else's behavior or performance and says, I don't have time to deal with this right now, or they're a bigger fish to fry and it boils up on the inside. And so it becomes cumulative. And so very often these leaders observe or witness other people and feel that friction on the inside and never speak about it.
Very interesting. So there's kind of that sense of feeling alone, feeling isolated, feeling, maybe a lack of connection. Uh,
Yes.
and then it could be as a result of, or maybe separately, that they're feeling strain in their relationships. So that can be in their romantic relationships, in their relationships at work. And there's probably a vicious cycle even between the two.
Yeah. Yeah. And they feel misunderstood. They feel misinterpreted. And so that also adds to that friction too. They're trying to accomplish something. Not everybody gets what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it. So they're on different playing fields from others very often.
One of the themes in this show, episode after episode, even though we're dealing with very different topics and very different experts, is that when people have a higher degree of stress, the types of, like, they're more susceptible to one issue or another, whether that issue is a strained relationship in of itself, whether it's a deeper mental health concern, whether it's even something like substance use later on as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything's probably very related. I'm not surprised. But then the third struggle that we see is what we call chronic dissatisfaction. So these leaders are hard on themselves and the people around them, but they're really tough. And what I would say is that they're always carrying a stick. I usually kind of make it look like this, and they bang themselves on the head. They carry a stick to punish themselves or to say, what's wrong with me? Why is this not working? What am I missing? Where am I? Why am I failing? It's so easy for other people, but they have a feeling, a chronic sense that they should be further ahead, moving faster, um, more accomplished than they currently are. And they don't know why things are so slow. Is it their team? Is it other people? Is it them? Are they poor leaders? They're constantly questioning themselves. It's very, very strange because you think of leaders as people with a high degree of confidence, but what we see is leaders who project confidence, but also have a high degree of self doubt internally. And that interesting blend is super common.
Sounds a lot like guilt to me.
Yeah, guilt too. Guilt. Like yeah, I'm failing people. I'm failing myself. I'm failing my family. I'm not performing as well as I should be.
Would you describe this chronic dissatisfaction as a sort of internal dialogue more so than one that's external?
It's definitely an internal dialogue. It's definitely a nagging internal dialogue, one that's
Yes.
incessant and shows up. And sometimes the way it shows up externally is it could look like an attack. It could look like an inquiry. It could look like the voice of frustration, like why isn't this working? Like what's holding us up? But that that's how it looks like externally. On the inside, it's very much pointed towards the self.
And what's the fourth one?
The fourth one is something that I invented, actually. It's a term I created called slippage. So, what is slippage? It's when people, particularly leaders, let very important things slip through the cracks. Things like their health, their sleep, their exercise, their healthy routines, their, you know, uh, everything that leads towards a healthy, happy, connected life. They often don't have time for friends or family. They're working long hours. They're tired. They fall asleep during the movie. They're over drinking, maybe eating the wrong things, but they're not fueling themselves in ways that leave them feeling whole, healthy, and happy and energetic. And so we see that very persistently among leaders. It's the rare leader who wakes up at like 4 in the morning and goes to the gym and does the thing that they need to do, but even then that exhausts them because they're on this treadmill that's like nonstop, and then they come home and they crash. And so they're trying to do it all. And sometimes it's tough to do it all.
Going back to that LinkedIn feed, I feel like as a budding leader myself, I'm scrolling through and I'm seeing so many different entrepreneurs and leaders who talk about that. Oh yeah, I wake up every morning at 3 and I go right to the gym and then I make sure I have time to read the paper. And yada yada yada, so on and so forth. And then like, oh, and then I make sure I'm home exactly at 6 because I've already worked for 12 hours so I can spend time with my kids. And you add up the hours and you're like, how? And then that's really a minority of people. There are so many leaders who are trying to do those things, and it sort of falls through the cracks.
Well, first of all, what you also see is somebody who's on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever, and they're sharing this, but how long do they sustain that for? They never
Hmm.
talk about that, right? So there's a sustainability issue that's not really addressed. That's one thing. The second thing is that the only road to success? And I think the answer is no. There are many roads to success, and certainly sleeplessness is not one of them. And so, we have these rare individuals who have the ability to live that pace and live that life. And then when we hold ourselves against them and compare ourselves, we think we're falling short and, oh, we should wake up earlier. I'll just set the alarm. And so what ends up happening is we're exhausted. We are beating ourselves up constantly. And because we're exhausted, then we say, well, why aren't we getting to where we need to go? And so it's this vicious circle. And what people are doing on an ongoing basis is looking at their shortcomings, and that's definitely not a formula for success.
And I think this actually leads, I don't even need to create a segue because it actually leads very well into our second question, which is in what ways do these mental health challenges manifest in a leader's work environment and how can they affect team dynamics? So, digging down, we have isolation, strained relationships, chronic dissatisfaction, slippage. This is going on for the leader, but how is it affecting not only themselves at work, but how are their teams perceiving them? What's going on there?
Yeah, so when a leader is carrying all of those struggles, what happens is um, they become disconnected, they become difficult to be with, and they become it's hard to connect with them truly in, as uh, in an organization. And so what we find is, and I'll say it a little bit differently, uh, the way a leader shows up trickles down throughout the organization. That's what we see. And so when we work with companies or organizations, we like to work with the leader first, the CEO, the C-suite. Why? Because when we see them shifting, when we see their mental health settling down, calming down, when we see them living more peacefully with greater ease and just like more comfortable in their own skin, what we see is that also trickles down. We get a more comfortable, more cohesive, more um, less stressed environment. And what we also see as a result is increased performance, increased job satisfaction, greater longevity, loyalty, all of these things. And so, how does it affect the rest of the team? It affects the rest of the team in every way. It affects the culture of the team. It affects we spend how many hours a day at work? Now it's even more than 8 hours a day. What we see is we're spending a lot of hours at work. And so those hours not only need to be productive hours, but they need to be satisfying hours. And if we see a leader who is constantly just wired, stressed, anxious, tense, those become less and less satisfying hours because that filters through, that seeps through the organization. And that's something we need to address immediately.
For some of our listeners who may not actually have experience being in a corporate environment, what is corporate culture? This isn't one of the questions, but I just want to. There's a couple questions that are going to talk about it, but we're here now, so I wanted to just define it
What
quickly.
is corporate culture? It's different for every organization, but corporate culture is the way we communicate. It's the way we interact at work. It's the expectations that are set. It's what happens during lunch. It's how things get done. It's how problems get solved. It's the how, right? Corporate culture is the how we do what we do.
Yeah,
It's
so
how we socialize, how we plan our goals. It's the how.
and it's how we utilize those things too. Like I think whenever we watch, I'm not sure if maybe I'm dating myself a little bit, but if any one of our listeners has seen a movie like The Social Network, where they're talking about the rise of Facebook, and you see those offices with the ping pong tables and things like that. Sure, it's nice that those recreational activities exist, but like, are we taking advantage of them and using them as breaks at lunch? Are we hanging out not even with our peers, but also our leaders, and actually taking that lunch break? And is that something that's being reinforced through the organization? Or is it not? Are breaks sort of, looked down upon, and taking that time you need for yourself? All of
I
those different
literally,
pieces. And it sounds
it
like it
starts with
starts
the
at the
leader
leader
first, but it
first.
also, like, I just came back from a speaking engagement in Connecticut, and one of the subjects that came up was
Hmm.
taking lunch. And we had one of the managers in one of the divisions who was not taking lunch, because she doesn't have time. She feels like other people need her. She's, required. If she leaves for a minute, other people are gonna not know what to do when she's not around. And it's just like this sense of, I can't move from where I am. I can't take 15 minutes to walk away from my desk, go for a walk, or whatever it is. I can't do that. And what's interesting is that was all self-imposed. So we see various levels of what's going on. Sometimes it is systemic, everybody's doing it. And sometimes what we see is one leader decides that if she or he leaves the environment, things are going to fall apart. And so we need to address that at all levels. But certainly, what we definitely need to do, and what we needed to do in this case, was the owner, the CEO of the company, needed to let her know, I need you to take lunch.
And I think it reminds me a lot of that. And I know you've used this example in our previous conversations with the oxygen mask on the plane. And if a leader isn't taking care of themselves, they're not going to do necessarily a great job at taking care of other people in the organization. And they will lead
That's
to
right.
burnout
And
probably a lot quicker, or more
right,
quickly, rather.
that's
That's
exactly
that's
right.
in
And
English.
sometimes we think, well, we don't have time for that. But if we don't make time for that, what we have is we're always on fire, and we're always in an emergency situation. And that's not a great way to build an organization long term at all.
So moving to our third question, which I think is interesting because I really don't think we talk about it enough, which is how those pressures of leadership also impact a leader's home life and their role as a
So
parent,
I
which
have
is
a
a culture of
philosophy about
itself,
that.
right?
My philosophy is that leadership and parenting are very, very similar. It's just that we don't think about it the same way. But if we did, then we'd treat our children better, and we would treat our employees with more TLC on both sides of the equation. We would treat our children as humans as opposed to people that just need to follow our rules and instructions. We would be more respectful of our children, that kind of thing. And at the same time, we would go to the office and interact with our employees more personally, in a more humane capacity. And so, what I think is they're deeply linked. And when we look at how a leader leads, we also see how they parent, and vice versa. If we look at how a leader has been parenting, that informs us tremendously with respect to how they parent and how they lead. So they're all very much interrelated, and one informs the other. Like your philosophy on parenting, your philosophy on leadership are linked together. And you can look at that, and we've deciphered that over and over and over again. It's really, really fascinating.
And it right before the show, I was looking at sort of the definitions of like what are styles of parenting, what are styles of leadership, and a lot of the terms are actually the same. Are you an authoritarian parent? Are you an authoritarian leader? Are you a laissez-faire? So on and so forth. And I think it's a really great opportunity for leaders to assess and take a look at themselves with support through a coach, through therapy, and really um, you know, how are they showing up in the world? How are they showing up with their teams? How are they showing up with their children? They're very likely to be linked. And what style is it that you really want, right? How do you want
I
to be
will say
showing up?
this, and I think this is an important subject, is that I think leaders who are parents and leaders who are leaders both need to learn one thing, and it's the same thing. They that would benefit them tremendously, and that is, if they decided to invest in learning and getting trained in coaching skills, they would be dramatically more impactful and effective as both parents and leaders in their organizations.
Love that. Investing in yourself, investing in your learning, and learning the skills to do the same for your team. It, it's hard to imagine a loose in that situation. Which brings us actually to our fourth. This is, I feel like my weakness in hosting podcasts is always the segue, and I know I'm bringing it up and highlighting
You're
it here,
doing
but
fine. You're doing
it's
fine.
right into our next question. It's it. Thanks, Kim. How can organizations create a culture that supports mental health for leaders and employees alike? And it
I
sounds
think
like
it
it's
is
investing in
investing in
coaching.
coaching.
It's
I think
investing in that
leaders need
culture.
to get coached. And I think it's very, very important for leaders to learn how to coach. I think that honestly, like it's the secret sauce of truly effective leaders is to not just guide your team. Here's the vision, let's go. But to also learn the coaching skills to help people maximize their potential and make sure that they are happy, satisfied, productive, and giving everything they can to the organization and leveraging their greatest skills. And so I think it's very, very important for coaches to be coached so that they're playing at their highest level, but also learn how to coach others on their team to play at their highest level as well. So I really, really think that's critical.
I think it's not just a one-time thing. Like I'll give a personal example for myself. I've been in therapy. I've been getting coached for most of my adult life, in one or two forms at the same time, or in other forms. And every time I engage in something around that, there's another opportunity for learning. And transparently, I'm getting coached now, like something that our company here at EHN is investing in with us. And it's really given me, even though I have a lot of those skills, I have been through it, I have coached other people. It's really shifting my perspective. And in this environment, it's allowing me to look at things in a different way in every conversation I'm having with my team and even my leaders too. So even if it's something that you've done before, it's something that you got to keep reinvesting in, because as you're growing, things are changing and you'll get more different and more things out of it, no matter what the service and
I
the care
agree.
that
I
you're
mean, like
accessing
what is
is.
what is coaching really? It's a process for self-awareness and decision making. And so people say, "Well,
Right.
I had a coach 3 years ago." Okay, but then what? You stop you stop deciding to become self-aware. So I think it's an ongoing process. I think it's a thing that we continue to do, and it's a thing that gives us insight, it gives us clarity, and it helps us make decisions, and it helps us really work on the things that uh, that are our sweet spot, where we are giving and contributing the most. So I think altogether, continuous coaching is really important, particularly for leaders.
So before we get to the last question, Kim, I want, well, I'm sure everybody wants, but we'd love to get into, where people can find you, share some of the things that you're working on
So
currently.
where can you find me? Go to frameofmindcoaching.com. Lots of information there, but you can also Google me, Google Kim Addis, ADES. I show up quite a bit, so you can find me. And if you want to reach me directly, it's kim@frameofmindcoaching.com. I love hearing from people and love knowing that people are tuning in and listening and taking something away. What are we working on right now? We've been coaching leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs for the past 20 years, and we use a process where we ask them to journal in a private and secure online journaling software. Now we're taking an interesting right turn. We're still coaching executives, but we are also training coaches in how to use our coaching process using journaling. And so it's called journal based coaching. And we just launched that accredited course, and we're going live in September. So that's super exciting. But that's what's up new and exciting on my life.
Very, very nice. Very exciting. So without further ado, this is the Five Facts podcast,
Let's do 5.
and we've only done four. Plus a couple, but we'll throw in the fifth. So looking ahead, what changes do you hope to see in how organizations address mental health, stress, care for leaders? And what impact do you think this will have on the overall workplace
I
culture?
I think that
What's the
one of the
future?
things that I discuss a lot when I talk to leaders and executives about coaching is, like, I go into organizations and I teach them our coaching approach, let's say. And very often the response is, well, that takes time. And the answer is yes, it takes time, but the time it takes will upfront will dramatically reduce the time in the long run. And so what's the change that I'm hoping will take place is that leaders will begin to understand the vital value and importance of taking that time up front to spend learning how to coach and creating a coaching environment and coaching culture inside their organizations. And I think that is where a lot of organizations are moving to, albeit some slower than others or some faster than others. And it's not universal quite yet, but I see that as becoming more and more of the norm where leaders, just like they know that they need to use the internet, it's a given. I think that learning how to coach down the road will become a given in the same capacity.
I think you've said this, not I think, I know you've said this, great leaders access their resources. There's so many different resources that leaders can access depending where they're at, where their teams are at. And as a leader, it's important to really take the time to explore what those different options are and what the impact of that can be on you, on your teams, and really the world around you. Kim, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. If you were to leave the listeners with one piece of advice around starting their own journey with mental health, with
I mean,
coaching,
I'm a
what would you
bit
tell them?
biased, right? But what I would tell them is like, your mental health journey becomes easier, lighter when you have some level of self awareness and a tool for self reflection. And I am partial to journaling. So, what I would do is I would encourage your audience to pick up a pad and a piece of paper or open a document and just start journaling, journal your thoughts and lay them down and then take a day, go back and read them and ask yourself if your thinking is aligned with your goals. Is this thinking going to help you get to where you want to go? It's a very simple concept, but journaling will really, really profoundly help you get to where you want to go.
Kim, thank you so much for being on the show today. Just want to leave the listeners with something from us, which is that recovery is possible, and EHN Canada is the place for both virtual and inpatient treatment for both mental health and addiction. To learn more about EHN Canada and how you can begin your own recovery journey, please go to ehncanada.com. To listen to even more episodes of the 5 FAQs podcast, you can check it out on your favorite streaming platform or on ehncanada.com. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.